Next, we're going to have some over to John. He's going to tell you about the Brooklands bike. Reading, great man, one of my heroes, really.
Thank you. What an act to have to follow.
Easy.
Well, actually, you won't believe this, but you had a tale about Riam.
Yes.
And about the TT in '54. I was there.
Where were you?
Well, I've got to tell you the story. Here I am as with my father.
Young lad.
Yeah, young lad. And I just passed the scholarship, right?
What for?
I don't know. But they told me I could go to a grammar school, so that was it. And as a reward, and I was into motorbikes, I already had a motorbike, and we decided, and I come from North Yorkshire, the very northern bit, so the story goes that we go to Liverpool to get on the ferry. Well, that was about 6 or 7 hours in those days, you know. So we get onto this boat, and the one we were supposed to go onto had broken down, so they put us on a small one, okay? And I think, well, I'm guaranteed that everybody on that boat was sick. And I mean sick. I remember seeing, I'll never forget this, two things. The one guy was leaning over the side, and his false teeth and everything went over the side. And I sat as a 10, 11-year-old in a coil of ropes at the front of this thing, and I'm looking round, and there's 10 foot of water around us, and I'm thinking, is this going to sink? Okay, so you can imagine it was a fair journey. We get there, and we walk down to Bray Hill. Okay, by this time we were, I think, traumatized, probably, whatever. And I was a Jeff Duke fan. In fact, I thought I was going to replace Jeff Duke. I soon realised that I wouldn't. Anyway, we're at the bottom of Bray Hill, and you're absolutely right. He came down Bray Hill with his foot down, and Bray Hill is, in those days, was different, whatever, yeah, on the Proboscis Norton. And again, it's one of the things. And as you say, the thing was that because of the weather, the start was delayed and delayed and delayed, and they eventually did start the race, and they stopped it after 4 laps. And I was devastated that Duke didn't win. And this man who was a scrambler, basically, for me, you know. The other, just add to that, I actually met, through Brooklands, with the Proboscis Norton, Rayam's brother. Because Braham's brother was actually his mechanic. And his brother's, not relation, but actually lives in Godalming, I think, just as a pillar thing. Anyway, that's just to, I've got to have to balance the story, which is, you know, okay, get on with the real things. Okay, well, we can't follow that, and in fact, what you see here is the difference between the wars, effectively. You know, you were post-war, we are pre-war. And so the first bike we've got here is Francis Barnett. And you talk about a lot of world records. Well, in fact, this thing, I call it a thing because it's an amazing monstrosity in a way. But this, one of its main claims to fame is it holds the 50-mile-an-hour record at Brooklands for 5 hours in the 175cc class. And so what they did, when you look at it, they figured it out and put a big tank on it and put 2 side tanks on it, so that they ended up hopefully not having to stop very often.
Same as this.
Same as that, yeah. Well, but what people don't realise about life is that you've got to do that to get that. You know, you're learning from that. So this is, and this guy Thomas Meeton was famous. He was a Francis Barnett works rider, broke many records. And I'm quite honestly, I haven't got the brain power to remember them all. But this is an example of Brooklands as was, and you move on to that. So where are we, guys? Can we get it to start?
One thing I am amazed at this bike, if you look at the exhaust system, it's got this expansion boxes that Walter Corden developed later, and for some reason Whedon was well on the case about the expansion capacities and dimensions, and all of a sudden it disappeared until really post-war. Anyway, we're going to follow it up. And incidentally, Miller's first bike was a Francis Barnett, 1929 Posi Lube model, 197. So quiet. We're going to have some life here. Cheers.
We are. There we go.
Yeah. So can you imagine sitting on that for 5 hours round Brooklands? As I think Sammy said, the guys that rode these things were well, the real, you know.
Mike, would you like to say a few words about John Surtees? He had the Graham Norton Kneeler until he sold it to Dieter Mutzler in Germany. I rode it at Mallory, and it was a fantastic bike.
Yeah, I know very little about it except that we have got a spare frame which we intend to build up to a replica of it at some stage. But it's before my time, Sammy, and so I know very little about the actual bike except what you told me.
John managed to get an awful lot of the Works Norton stuff from Reg Deaton, and he managed to get the Ram, the big nose job, and I rode it at Mallory, and it was fantastic bike to ride, like all John's bikes, very well set up, lovely carburation, and just pleasure to ride. Anyway, we're on AJS's now. This is the early runner of the 7R inside here. So, go on, man.
Yeah, this is AJS in the 20s. I think it was 1920-21. Actually won the senior TT, and they had a couple of years where I think it was the first time that it happened. A 350 actually won the 500 as well. So AJS were in their ascendancy at the time, and then in I think it was 22ish they came out with what became affectionately known as a big port. And one of the things that intrigues me about this, and we come back to development of bikes and everything, if you look at all the bikes at Brooklands, you'll find they've all got big exhausts and small inlets.
Wrong way around.
Yes! But it took a lot of time of people learning, you know, about things. And this one is very special because we've actually got, Jim, we've got the son of the owner, okay? The original owner. So, Jim has kindly put this bike on loan to the museum, and I've got to tell this story quickly, and then we'll talk a little bit about your father. When I first joined the museum, it was there, and it was clear that somebody had done a lot of work on it, but never finished it. And I think that was the way it came to the museum. The cables were missing, there was no fuel tanks and pipes on it and whatever. So I found out Jim's address and telephone number, and I rang him up and I said, would you mind if I commissioned this and ran it? And the answer was?
Oh, absolutely.
Now, can you tell us a little bit about your father, briefly?
Oh, yeah. Dad was really keen on speed, and he's brought up in London. And his cousin at the time had this bike in bits. And so he said, did he want it? And he said, oh, yes, I want it. And so he rebuilt it. And because Brooklands was just down the road, him and his brother always used to go to Brooklands. And there's this great apocryphal tale of him watching some of these big car events, sitting on Brooklands Bank and various other things. But he said, let's go and race it. And so I've given Sammy some pictures of father in the 1930s on this bike. And so in 1939, we've got some lap times of this bike racing at Brooklands, and he did nearly 90 miles an hour average on that particular bike, and I think that was a pretty good speed. But then it went into hibernation. He was an aero engine designer during the war, working for Rolls-Royce, and his background, he worked in engineering, and he was asked by Rolls-Royce to come in to work at Derby, and so he did all the supercharger work for the Merlins and Griffons, and so that was his work. And he met my mother at the time, and she was also working for Rolls-Royce, and she was one of the few lady designers, and she was designing all the gears for the Merlin gearbox. So that was quite an interesting tale. Then we moved to Bristol. Sandy Hooker asked him to go to Bristol, and he did a whole lot of work working for Hooker during literally in the 60s and 70s. And he retired. His last project was he was in charge of the RB199 development for the Tornado, and so that was his parting gift. But this bike was still in bits in the garage during the 60s and 70s, and so when he retired from Rolls-Royce, he said, I want to put it back together. And so the workshop was in the best bedroom of the house, and so he did. He said that the AJS, one of the weak links of the AJS was the cylinder head. And so he re-machined that cylinder head that you can see on the bike today in the workshop. And he did all the timings. And my son and I
First of all, well, you want to write? No, first of all, I have two things to say. Would you please express your pleasure in the normal way to this man? I now understand, I think, that you know something about riding trials, don't you?
I've done a bit, yeah.
Done a bit?
If I stuck at it longer, it would have been better.
Okay. You wouldn't like to show us how to ride a trials bike, would you?
Well, I could ride it around here, you know.
I thought you had a section though.
We have, but it's too muddy and too...
Oh! No, I thought if it wasn't too bad, it would have been nice to see you on a trials bike.
The section's over by those trees over there, and I don't know what all these ladies, they get mucked up.
How about that for an excuse for an Irishman?
Anyway, it's great to have you all here. This is the proverbial hobby gone mad, this lot. So we've been here 26 years now, so I'm getting used to it, and it's a pleasure to be in here. Another day in paradise each day. So not many of you have a day in paradise every day, is it?
That's correct. No.
So it's not really work, but it's just great pleasure, and we keep finding bikes. I'm just going on the phone in a minute to bid for some bikes at H&H auctions at the National Motorcycle Museum. Went up yesterday to have a look at them, so let's hope there's no serious bidders there and we might get a few. So they will be additions to the museum, let's hope so. What's happening next? Well, we've got a full programme of events this summer. We had one on Sunday, but I've cancelled it because we are lucky today. The weather's rubbish, and we couldn't afford to have the paddocks full of cars, and the mud would have been all over the place, and I don't want to be running the Neeler in the rain, so we have postponed it. However, there we go. If you want to have a wander around the museum, you're more than welcome. Workshop's still open if you want to have another browse through. You'll all be taking catalogues home with you, so you remember what you've done today. So when you're having a glass of wine tonight with him, you can tell him what he missed.
One thing I forgot to say, we should thank Sharon for a last-minute organisation or reorganisation. She put a lot of Jim. And Jim, sorry, yes, I'm not, but they all contributed to today.